Hi, folks. Welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I don't even know why this became such a big deal, to be honest with you. But we're going to look at all the facts, and then we're going to have a little bit of a chit-chat about it. Now, what you're seeing on the screen next to me is a picture of San Francisco Giants pitcher Landen Roupp. Now, this image recently went viral online and sparked a surprisingly large controversy. At first glance, you might not even understand why. After all, he's just standing there wearing a Giants cap. But if you look closely, you'll notice something written on the side of the hat. It says Gen 9:12-16. That Bible reference is what started all of this. Now, for those unfamiliar, Genesis 9:12-16 is the passage in which God establishes his covenant with mankind after the flood and identifies the rainbow as a sign of that covenant. The passage reads, "And God said, 'This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth,'" and so on. It's foundational Old Testament theology and a passage that most Christians are familiar with. Now, Roupp wasn't the only player involved. Roupp, along with relievers J.T. Brubaker and Ryan Walker, took the mound during the Giants Pride Night this past June 12th, wearing the rainbow-themed caps that included references to Genesis. A fourth pitcher, Sam Hentges, chose not to wear the Pride cap at all and instead wore a standard Giants cap. Now, needless to say, shortly after the game, photos of Roupp along with similar photos of Dodgers pitcher Clayton Kershaw displaying Genesis references on Pride-themed gear quickly went viral online. And that sparked a massive reaction. A lot of the gays got upset. A lot of the wokies got upset. A lot of the people you'd expect to get very angry about something like this got upset that players were publicly referencing scripture while participating in Pride Night events. The controversy eventually grew large enough that MLB Chief Communications Officer Pat Courtney issued a statement according to reporting first published by Outsports and later confirmed by USA Today. Courtney stated that the writing violated league rules and that the players had been warned not to do it again. Now, for context, according to USA Today, MLB uniform policy prohibits players from adding writing or illustrations to any part of their uniforms, regardless of what the message says. According to USA Today, a first violation results in a warning, while a second violation can result in discipline. So that's the official explanation for what happened. Now, before I get into my opinion, I think it's important to establish a broader point. You may have noticed that these hats contain rainbow colors. Now, to be absolutely clear, in the modern American political context, those colors have become associated with gay ideology. And yes, folks, the pride flag is representative of a political ideology. It represents a specific ideological movement that is not foundational to America and that has increasingly become at odds with traditional American values. Now, obviously, I have to add a caveat here because part of American values are centered in individual liberties, and within the confines of the law, of course, people can do whatever they want. If somebody wants to be gay, that's their personal choice. The issue is not individuals making personal choices. The issue, and what we're going to discuss at length today, is the superimposition of that gay ideology onto regular, ordinary Americans. That is what I believe is inherently un-American about this entire situation and the current moment we find ourselves in this socio-political zeitgeist. All of that to say, I think it's evident to most people with a pair of eyes and ears that this constant effort to push this gay ideology into every aspect of American life amounts to a trampling of our basic individual liberties protected by our Constitution. Because look, folks, when people are expected to celebrate gay, affirm gay, promote gay, and participate in gay, regardless of their own beliefs, that ceases to be about tolerance and starts becoming coercive. And that's ultimately why this story is interesting and why perhaps it's going as viral as it's going, because despite all the talk about diversity and inclusion, the wokies are very, very, very upset that Landen Roupp would have the audacity to not simply allow himself to be a tool for gay propaganda. Because apparently in America in 2026, expressing your own religious beliefs while participating in a quote-unquote Pride Night crosses the line. Apparently, Roupp doesn't get to acknowledge his faith without causing some sort of national controversy. But look, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Before I start diving deeper into my own opinions, let's stop for a second and take a look at the local ABC7 coverage where they interview folks from Outsports and provide some additional context and updates on this situation.
Yeah, hey, Dan. The Palms here at Oracle are decked out for Pride Month. Pride Night is supposed to be a celebration of inclusion here at Oracle, but it's now drawing a lot of backlash and intervention from Major League Baseball towards several players. Giants Pride Night at Oracle, an annual June fan event for the LGBTQ plus community. But for many, the event was marred when three Giants pitchers, Landen Roupp, JT Brubaker, and Ryan Walker, was seen with the biblical verse, Genesis 9:12-16, written on their rainbow pride caps, which says the rainbow is a symbol of a covenant between God and all living creatures.
They defaced the pride rainbow with a Bible verse telling the LGBT community that they do not own the rainbow, that God owns the rainbow.
Sid Ziegler, co-founder of Outsports, calls the Pride Night display disgraceful.
If I were a Giants fan, I would never attend a game again.
In a statement, the Giants organization telling ABC7 Eyewitness News, the San Francisco Giants are proud to support Pride Night and the LGBTQ plus community. We also respect that individuals may make personal choices about participating in team activations. We understand that the choices by individual players has caused pain and anger to many in the LGBTQ plus community, and we're sorry for that. Those choices do not change our organization's commitment to inclusion, belonging, and creating a welcoming environment for all. For Ziegler, the statement falls short.
For the Giants to take no responsibility and essentially stand by their players is gross.
It was disheartening.
SF Pride Executive Director Suzanne Ford had this to say.
I work for San Francisco Pride, and I think if I espoused beliefs that weren't inclusive, my board of directors would have a problem with that. And I think the same thing goes with these Giants players. They work for the San Francisco Giants.
Landen Roupp told the Mercury News he meant no hate at all. It's what he stands for as a believer in God. Major League Baseball is now involved, issuing a warning to the players. In a statement to Outsports, a spokesperson says the writing on the cap violates our rules and, consistent with normal practice, we have warned the players about future violations.
Now, what's really telling is the reaction from the guy at Outsports. Listen carefully to how he's framing this entire situation. He's talking as though Roupp and the other pitchers somehow committed blasphemy against pride, against gay ideology, simply by writing a Genesis reference on their hats. That's the implication. The way he describes it, the offense isn't that they violated some MLB uniform policy. The offense is that they dared to reference a biblical understanding of the rainbow while participating in Pride Night. He's acting as though the blasphemy is being committed against pride itself, as though pride has become something sacred that cannot be questioned, cannot be challenged, or even interpreted differently in America. And that's what makes this so bizarre. If you actually look at the passage we discussed earlier that he's referencing in his hat from Genesis, there's nothing in it even remotely referencing homosexuality. There's nothing in it that attacks gay people. There's nothing in it that condemns anyone. If these players wanted to make some sort of direct statement about homosexuality, they could have chosen entirely different passages. They could have cited Paul. They could have cited passages from Leviticus. They could have chosen verses that explicitly address homosexuality, but they didn't. Instead, they chose Genesis 9:12-16. They chose a passage about God's covenant with mankind and the rainbow as a sign of that covenant. In other words, they expressed their own religious belief, their own understanding of Scripture, and their constitutionally protected faith. Yes, it's a different understanding of the rainbow than the modern pride interpretation. That's obvious. But that's precisely why this reaction from this guy from Outsports and the gay community is so revealing. Because what did the journalist say? He mocked the idea that Christians would claim God owns the rainbow. Well, according to the Bible, that's exactly where the symbolism comes from. And that's where I have to ask a very simple question. Who exactly is claiming ownership over the rainbow here? Because the implication seems to be that Christians aren't even allowed to reference the biblical origin of the rainbow without being accused of doing something offensive. What it appears to be is that on the gay side, they're allowed to attach meaning to the rainbow. They're allowed to claim ownership over the rainbow. But the moment Christians reference the original biblical passage from Genesis, suddenly that's treated as some sort of provocation. That's treated as offensive. That's treated as crossing a line. I mean, you own the rainbow because you take it up the keister. Like, what are you talking about? Are you kidding me? What is the logic here? What's the basis for your claim? What exactly gives the gays exclusive ownership over the rainbow that predates the movement by thousands of years? The entire thing is so profoundly unintelligent and emotionally manipulative, you can only laugh at it. The standards are completely different depending on who's speaking, apparently. They get to own everything. As a Christian, you don't even get to exist in this environment. Landen Roupp is expected to participate in Pride Night. He's expected to wear the symbolism. He's expected to outwardly endorse this gay agenda, this propaganda, but apparently he can't even attempt to reconcile that symbolism with his own religious convictions. He can't even write a Bible verse on the hat to make himself personally comfortable wearing this piece of propaganda. He can't even make a small acknowledgement of his own faith. Instead, he's expected to just be a tool for this gay propaganda exactly as presented. He has to outwardly participate in this brainwashing tool, and any attempt to express his own beliefs is treated as inherently offensive. Any attempt to express his own identity is treated as blasphemy toward the gay ideology. That's the message being sent here with this response. And let's be honest about what makes this even more absurd, because we're told that handwriting a Bible verse on a baseball cap is somehow crossing a line. That's supposedly the outrageous act. That's the supposed offensive thing here. Meanwhile, many of the same activists pushing this narrative spent years defending policies that involved children being placed on puberty blockers, on cross-sex hormones, and irreversible medical procedures. And yes, I understand that all of this is controversial language, but let's call it all for what it is. This is end stage for this gay ideology, and we've seen this happen for the last several years. They're allowing children to undergo life-altering medical interventions, procedures that many argue amount to mutilation, and in some cases, permanent sterilization and castration. And whether you agree with his characterization or not, it's remarkable that handwriting Genesis 9:12-16 on a baseball cap is treated as a greater offense than endgame gay ideology. Writing a Bible verse on a hat is peak blasphemy now. What kind of a world are we living in? The level of inversion is just profoundly disturbing at this point. Because again, America is a country built on individual freedom. You can be gay if you want. You have that freedom. You can live your life however the hell you want. Compared to much of the rest of the world, you can do so openly and freely. In fact, compared to most other countries in the world, you can be gay in America with a remarkably high degree of comfort and legal protection. That's the reality. You go to Palestine, you go to parts of the Middle East and Africa, you go to many places around the world, and you're going to have a much harder time being openly gay than you will in the United States. Let's just be honest about that for a second. And yet, we're increasingly told that people are not allowed to express their own constitutionally protected freedom of religion or freedom of speech if that expression conflicts with this preferred gay ideological narrative. Now, obviously, the San Francisco Giants are a private organization. Major League Baseball is a private organization. They can establish dress codes and workplace policies if they want to. Nobody's disputing any of that. They can have their own rules. But that still leaves a larger question that nobody seems to be willing to answer. Why are players being used as props for political ideology in the first place? Why are athletes being constantly pressured into participating in gay political messaging that has absolutely nothing to do with playing baseball? Why are people expected to publicly demonstrate gay ideological conformity in order to avoid controversy? Why are they being coerced into participating in these demonstrations of supposed virtue? And why are every single one of these displays of gay ideological conformity framed as inclusion when in practice they often accomplish the exact opposite? Because who exactly is being included here? It certainly doesn't feel like it's being very inclusive towards Christians. It doesn't feel very inclusive toward people with traditional religious beliefs. It doesn't feel very inclusive toward anyone who disagrees with gay ideology. Instead, what we're seeing is that one side's identity must be celebrated, affirmed, elevated, and publicly promoted, while any expression of a competing identity is treated as offensive, intolerant, or even blasphemous. One side gets affirmation. The other side gets told to shut the hell up, get in line, and participate. Otherwise, you lose everything. That's the double standard. And it's a double standard that is fundamentally at odds with the principles of our free society. Because regardless of how you cut it, you can be gay if you want to. You can be whatever the hell you want in America. I've said this numerous times already. That's one of the beautiful things about this country. You have freedom. You have freedom to choose. You have rights. The problem begins when those freedoms stop being enough. When those freedoms end up being an excuse to trample on the liberties, the God-given liberties that have been assigned to all of us by God and which are protected by our Constitution. That's why the problem is the demand to participate in this gay ideological movement, the demand to affirm this gay political agenda, the demand to conform to the gay political agenda. Why is it, again, that ordinary Americans must be coerced into celebrating, promoting, and participating in this gay worldview, regardless of their own beliefs? And that's where the story really becomes much bigger than a Bible verse on a baseball hat. Because look, at the end of the day, I think the reason why the gay lobby is making such a big deal out of all of this is because, well, it's all actually pretty simple. This was never about a uniform policy. It was never about writing on a hat. It was never really even about Major League Baseball rules. The reason this became such a controversy is because a player dared to inject his own perspective, his own God-given perspective, into a piece of political symbolism that activists have come to view as exclusively theirs. That's why a simple Bible reference generated this level of outrage from the gays. Not because it was offensive, not because it attacked anyone, not because it condemned anyone, but because it challenged the idea that there can be only one acceptable interpretation of the rainbow, and that's obviously, according to the gays, the gay interpretation. And frankly, what's amazing about all of this is that most of the people getting outraged don't even watch baseball. They don't watch sports. They don't buy tickets. They don't sit through 162 games a year. They don't support these organizations. They show up when there's a political controversy, demand that everyone conform to their gay worldview, and then disappear the moment the news cycle moves on. Meanwhile, the people who actually support these teams, the people who buy the merch, who watch the games, who buy the season tickets, who bring their families to the stadiums, and spend years following this team and these teams and praying that someday these teams win, are increasingly being told that their beliefs are unwelcome in this league. They're being told that their religious convictions are offensive. They're being told that even a harmless Bible reference is somehow unacceptable. And that's where I think organizations like the San Francisco Giants are making a huge mistake here. Because whether these executives running this team realize it or not, they're alienating their own fan base. Every year, they seem more concerned about appeasing activists on social media than they are about respecting the people who actually keep the lights on. They keep injecting politics into spaces where many people simply just want to enjoy a game. They want to spend time with their families. They want to eat a hot dog. They want to support this team and just get away from their everyday drudge of work, homework. Because look, no matter how often these activists try to paint a picture that everything is woke now, the reality is that sports and baseball fans, for that matter, come from all walks of life. Some are conservative, some are liberal, some are religious, some aren't. The one thing they all have in common is that they're there for baseball. The moment a team starts acting like one specific political ideology, that being the gay ideology, is mandatory, they're inevitably going to push people away. And that's exactly what's happening here. A player writes a Bible verse on a hat, a verse that doesn't attack anyone, a verse that doesn't condemn anyone, a verse that simply reflects his faith. And somehow he's treated as though he's the problem. If that's where we've arrived as a culture, then maybe the issue isn't really the Bible verse. Maybe the issue is that we've reached a point where some people view even the mildest expression of traditional religious belief as an act of defiance. And if that's in fact true, then this controversy tells us a whole lot more about the people who are outraged than it does about Landen Roupp.
Specific chapter and verse that you have?
Yeah, 12 through 16. It's just about God's covenant and a promise that he makes to us. that, you know, his faithfulness and his mercy. And it's just kind of something I believe in, and I stand firm in that. And thankfully, we live in a country where, you know, we have the freedom to believe what we want. So, but I mean, it's not anything, you know, there's no hate at all. It's just what I stand for and what I stand in. I believe in God. And like I said, we live in a country where you're welcome to believe what you want. There's freedom of speech and stuff like that. So that's really all I have to say about that. I'm just thankful that God's put me in this situation, and that I can go out and, you know, share His.
I think it's interesting to look at the way this dynamic is actually playing out, because if you remember a few years ago, around 2020, Colin Kaepernick, the former San Francisco 49ers quarterback, became one of the most celebrated political activists in sports. During the national anthem, he would take a knee as a protest. He said he was protesting police misconduct, but many Americans viewed it as a protest against America itself, against American institutions, and against the country more broadly. Unsurprisingly, that sparked a huge political debate. Conservatives criticized him heavily, while much of the media, corporate America, and the political left elevated him to hero status. He received praise from celebrities, politicians, major corporations, and even secured lucrative endorsement deals with Nike, for example. He became one of the most visible activist athletes in the entire country during that period. Now, compare that reaction to what you're seeing here with Roupp, because in many ways, we're witnessing the exact inverse dynamic. Conservatives generally stand with America. That doesn't mean we believe America is perfect. There are plenty of things worth criticizing in America. There are policies worth criticizing. There are politicians worth criticizing. There are mistakes throughout our history that certainly deserve criticism. But we also believe that foundationally, this country is one of the greatest, if not the greatest country ever created. When you compare America to most other countries throughout history, when you compare it to the empires that preceded it, many of which were built on conquest, colonialism, and endless war, America compares remarkably well. And that doesn't mean that we're absolutely flawless. It means one should recognize a broader context if we're talking about countries and comparing apples to apples. Now, all that being said, back to the comparison. Let's compare reactions, okay? Because the same activists, the same journalists, the same media figures who are now attacking Landen Roupp would have been celebrating Colin Kaepernick just a few years ago. In fact, if Roupp had done what Colin Kaepernick did, but from the opposite ideological perspective, he'd probably be getting endorsement deals, sponsorships, and nonstop media praise if we're supposed to go by the anecdotal example of Kaepernick. If he, Roupp, were engaged in approved activism, he'd be celebrated as courageous. He'd be getting that Nike deal. He'd be on magazine covers. He'd be hailed as someone using his platform to make a difference. Instead, because his statement comes from a traditional Christian perspective, he's being treated as controversial. And what's especially striking is that Roupp's actions weren't even remotely as confrontational as Kaepernick's. Kaepernick openly challenged America, openly criticized American institutions, and made claims about the country that many Americans strongly disagreed with. Roupp didn't do anything even remotely close to that. He didn't attack anyone. He didn't condemn anyone. He didn't protest anyone, in fact. He simply referenced a Bible passage and said, in effect, that this is what I believe. That's it. He expressed a personal religious conviction. He expressed his faith. In a free country, he's allowed to do that. That's supposed to be one of the basic freedoms that Americans get to enjoy by living here. Now, I did notice that several people online have already begun offering to help these players sue either the San Francisco Giants or the MLB. I don't know whether the players have any interest in actually doing that, and I don't know how a lawsuit like that would ultimately play out, but I do find it interesting that people have begun raising questions about whether players are being pressured into participating in these sorts of ideological rituals, this sort of political messaging that may conflict in their own religious beliefs. Now, at the same time, I do think it's important to bring up some contradictions in this situation, because just a few years ago, the LA Dodgers apologized for disinviting and then ultimately re-inviting the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence to participate in their Pride Night. For those unfamiliar, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence are a group that openly mocks Catholicism, Catholic traditions, and Catholic religious imagery. Yet the Dodgers, operating in one of the largest Catholic populations in the country, decided not only to welcome the group back, but to honor them. Whether you agree with that decision or not, many people have pointed to it as another example of a double standard. Mockery directed at Christianity is often defended as expression or performance art, while expressions of traditional Christianity are increasingly treated as offensive or controversial, unsettling, oppressive. Ultimately, I think that's why this story resonates with so many folks out there. These contradictions speak for themselves. You learn a lot about institutions by looking at what they choose to protect and what they choose to attack. You learn a lot about organizations by looking at which beliefs are celebrated and which beliefs are treated as unacceptable. In this case, MLB and organizations like the Giants appear far more committed to promoting a modern gay political ideology than they are to accommodating the traditional Christian beliefs held by the majority of this country. Now, obviously, supporters of these initiatives would disagree with that characterization, but from the perspective of the majority of Americans, that's exactly what this looks like. It looks like one set of beliefs receives institutional protection and preference, while another is treated as a problem that needs to be managed and put away. And that's why people continue to react so strongly to hypocrisies and stories like this. And look, at the end of the day, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. It'll be interesting to see whether organizations like the San Francisco Giants continue down this path and whether fans continue to support this garbage, because every decision has consequences and every institution eventually has to live with the effects of the priorities it chooses. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.